Marissa had always believed she was moving to a quiet, ordinary town when she arrived in Hawthorne Ridge, yet something about the place unsettled her from the first moment. The streets were lined with aging ivy-covered houses that whispered secrets through their creaking doors and wrought iron fences, and the neighbors' polite but distant seemed to exist in a strange, delicate balance, as if even a single misstep might disturb the fragile peace. Her own new home, a weathered two-story on the corner of Maple Avenue, carried the scent of dust and memories, yet it felt alive in a way that drew her in. Then she saw him, across the street, standing in the shadowed gate of a house with blackened windows, a man so impossibly pale and tall that he seemed to absorb the moonlight itself. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes sharp, calculating. Ancient followed her movements as she unpacked, sending a chill that ran deeper than the night air. When she finally introduced herself, he spoke with a low, smooth cadence that seemed almost hypnotic. "I'm Alaric," he said, and even in the briefest exchange, she felt the weight of centuries in those words, a quiet magnetism that made her pulse quicken despite the instinctive fear curling in her stomach. Days passed, and she began to notice unsettling habits. He never ate in public, never seemed to sleep, and moved only at night, his presence like a shadow gliding silently over his property. There was an odd fragrance that accompanied him, sometimes a metallic sweetness she couldn't place, and the more she observed him, the more she realized that Hawthorne Ridge's quiet was not the kind of calm one could trust. It was a fragile veil hiding something far older and darker than she had ever imagined. Eventually, the truth came out in the soft rustle of black lily in his garden. "I am a vampire," Alaric admitted, and though Marissa expected theatrics, there were none. Just a being older than time itself, serene and terrible, whose existence carried both elegance and an undeniable predatory danger. Yet, despite her horror, fascination bloomed in her chest. Over the following weeks she ventured closer, drawn by his presence, hearing centuries of lost civilizations in the quiet weight of his words, glimpsing the loneliness behind the calculated precision of his movements, until she realized she was no longer merely observing a neighbor. She was entwined with something that could unravel her world entirely. The days that followed were a tense mixture of wonder and terror. Marissa found herself increasingly unable to sleep, plagued by dreams that stretched her through shadowed corridors filled with whispers she could never understand. When she walked near Alaric, she could feel a pull at the edge of her senses, an invisible thread drawing her toward him, even as a deep primal fear screamed that the line between life and death was thinner than she had ever known. And then the hunters came, humans obsessed with the destruction of the supernatural, carrying stakes and torches, drawn by whispers and rumor, threatening to tear Hawthorne Ridge apart in their zeal. Marissa had first noticed them lurking near Alaric's house and had tried to warn him, but her own fear was powerless against the need to act. She ran, shouting, guiding him through alleys and back streets to safety, feeling the raw, terrifying pulse of the world in motion as torches flared and shadows moved faster than her eyes could follow. She saw glimpses of the unnatural in him, his speed, the impossible precision of his movements, and realized just how fragile humans were in the face of a being like Alaric. When it was over, the hunters scattered or lay silent, victims of a force they could neither understand nor fight. And yet, even in the aftermath, Marissa's fascination deepened. She learned more of his habits, the quiet rituals of someone who had survived centuries by blending into human life, always observing, always patient, carrying the melancholy of eternity in every movement, every glance. But the danger was never far behind. Hawthorne Ridge, with its still streets and polite neighbors, could never truly protect her. Alaric's world pressed against hers with a weight that was impossible to ignore, and she felt herself shifting, subtly at first, a change in her very being, as though she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She was living in the space between human and monster, drawn to the darkness yet terrified of it, caught in the gravitational pull of someone whose presence was at once protective, seductive, and terrifying. The final confrontation came on a storm-ravaged night that seemed to twist reality itself. Thunder rattled the windows, and rain poured like silver knives as the hunters returned, more determined, more ruthless. They surrounded Alaric's home, shouting incantations and brandishing stakes, while Marissa ran once more into the night, drawn by a compulsion she could not resist. She saw him emerge, silent and fluid, a predator in the rain, his eyes glinting with something cold, detached, and terrible. In moments, the chaos unfolded screams, flashes of movement too quick for the human eye, the metallic scent of blood and ozone in the storm. Alaric moved among them as if dancing with death itself, felling the intruders with a terrifying grace that left Marissa trembling and gasping. When the storm finally passed, the hunters were gone or scattered, and the silence that followed pressed against her like a weight she could not shake. Alaric turned to her then, pale and dripping, his dark eyes unreadable, and spoke softly, almost mournfully. "You wanted to know the truth. Now you must live with it." The metallic tang she had smelled so often filled her nostrils, and a weakness spread through her body, a mark of the encounter she would never forget. She realized in horror that she had been changed, touched by something she could never undo. He moved closer, brushing her ear with his cold lips and whispering, "You cannot stay human and remain untouched. My world has a way of claiming those who dare to watch from the edge, collapsing, shivering, caught between fear and something almost irresistible." She understood that her ordinary life was gone. Alaric's world had claimed her, even as she remained human, and the shadows of Hawthorne Ridge were no longer her refuge. They were a cage, a realm where predator and prey walked side by side, indistinguishable and eternal. When she awoke, the streets were silent, Alaric gone, leaving only the metallic tang and faint scent of roses in the air. Yet she knew he was still there, watching, patient, eternal, and she realized that she would never be safe in the world she once knew. The line between human and monster had been forever blurred. Marissa had survived, yes, but she was no longer truly human. Hawthorne Ridge was no longer a quiet town. It was a place haunted by shadows and hunger, and she was trapped in its darkness, marked by the vampire who had lived next door, and forever touched by a presence that was both beautiful and terrifying beyond comprehension.